Today, I'm speaking with Twisha Patni, an art director and graphic designer. She's worked with brands like Apple, Spotify, Netflix, The Economist, the New York Times, and she's now at Buck. We spoke about a lot of things, obviously. We spoke about being multidisciplinary, how she's developed that skill set over time, her work at Buck, obviously, illustration systems, particularly for Google Gemini, which she's just worked on, internships, style and multi-style, dabbling, personal burnout, and a really interesting conversation about how to really root visual design in concept and strategy, which I learned a ton from. So as always, if you appreciate the show, you can leave a rating wherever you're listening right now and share it with a friend. And I hope you enjoy this interview with Twisha Patni. So Twisha, as I was researching your work, I was kind of struck by kind of just how much you've done, both in terms of like, I guess, the places that you've worked and the projects, but also the skill sets that you have. And maybe this is normal for you and people like you in your field, but I guess I have a question about how you see roles in design and like how it's changed. Your work spans like illustration, direction, UI, design, strategy, and now motion, and probably more. Obviously, you like being creative, and that's going to naturally lead you to lots of different things. But do you think that in the future this is going to become more and more common? Like, I guess what's it like inside Buck? Do most people work like you do across a range of things, or are there like lots of specialists as well in Buck?
Yeah, I mean, I think my personal skill set, I think it grew a lot just by staying curious and by saying yes to things and, kind of depending on whatever a project brief needed from in terms of execution, in terms of creative strategy, in terms of creative thinking or stuff like that. I think I always found it interesting to kind of just stay curious about learning different types of softwares or from the people on the team, and then making sure that that really fit the what the brief was really looking for. So for myself, I started in graphic design traditionally, and then I kind of slowly branched into other stuff depending on what made sense. So that led to kind of to illustration, to creative strategy, to and now art direction and looking at branding and motion. And so I've always been very curiosity forward. And then the mediums and the tools that are kind of needed have always been like, okay, whatever makes sense and we can figure it out on the go. But yeah, I think at Buck, it's it's really nice because you can kind of stretch across a lot of different disciplines if you want, but you can also really like niche down and get really specific about something that you want to do. And the resourcing team can kind of help put you on those kinds of projects accordingly. But I've been a little bit, maybe I would say more hybrid or a bit more broad in terms of wanting to develop a lot of different types of skill sets and then wanting to even art direct for a lot of different types of mediums and tools and execution. So that could be like branding, illustration systems, UI, UX, storytelling for products. Yeah.
Nice. And has it always been that way? Like since you started out, was that always kind of like a vision for yourself? Did you always know that you were going to do a lot of different things, or is it just sort of ended up being that way?
No, it was definitely not planned. I think for me, I went to college at Pratt Institute. My major was graphic design. I never took an illustration class, never took an art direction class, never took a UI UX class. And then I interned a lot. My college was in New York, so b- basically every summer, every kind of fall semester, spring semester, well, most of them, I was doing my classes, but I was also interning, and I tried to get a range of different types of internships, and then through those, I kind of unintentionally was like, okay, I really like medium-sized studios. I don't know if I want to go into an in-house role. I don't know if that's if tech is the right place or if fashion is the right place. And I think I was starting to assess things like that. Um, During one of my internships, I kind of just it was a slow period. And I got an iPad at a discount and I just started kind of messing around with illustration in my free time. Um, and then because of that, I knew that I wanted to do a combination of branding, but also illustration, but also editorial stuff. And I was still really nerdy about typesetting and typefaces and things like that. So I kind of wanted my work and my full-time job to encompass all of that somehow. Um, and yeah, and my first job was at Refinery 29, which was really nice because I could do like broader graphic design things, but then literally make illustrations for articles. And then at Buck, right after that, it's just been like anything and everything. So I think as different projects have come up, I've just always been a yes person and I'm like, yeah, I want to try it, I'll do it. And I usually end up enjoying it. So that's
That's interesting. Yeah, that was on the tip of my tongue as well, being a yes person. Like, it's really interesting, like how that leads you on different paths, you know. And it sounds like you've ended up in a role which is kind of like really perfect for now for you, of being like just doing a lot of different things. And yet also sometimes you do need to be like, wait, I want to like have my finger in all of the pies of this creative project, but like I can't do that and I shouldn't do that. Like, I guess that question about like, I forget what the exact phrasing is, but there's that useful question about like what you're best at and should do, the things that you want to do, but like can do, and the things that you don't want to do and can't do, and things like that, and breaking it up. Have you ever thought about that? Like, what are the things that you've been like, okay, no, Twisha, I'm not going to do that in this project or this particular period?
yeah, I think about that a lot. I feel like there's definitely like there's a good side and a bad side of saying yes to everything, especially with projects, because sometimes you're like, I want to do the visioning, the strategy, the creating all the territories, and then even the execution, and then passing it on to production. Like someone could potentially technically do all of that, but is that the most efficient way of doing things? A, probably not. B, you're working with a team, you're not a solo person. And so like looking at other people's kind of even perspectives, but then even their like the skill sets and what they can bring to the table with execution. I feel like finding the perfect balance of when to go, okay, I'm gonna step back and look at the big picture versus really, really like scale in and be specific with the details. I think that, yeah, there is the right balance of, when you should kind of let people go have fun with their craft and bring whatever they want to the table, but then yeah, now I'm really learning about like, because I became an art director last year, and so now I'm kind of hyper aware of just how involved I am in a project when it comes to the execution versus just the visioning, and then how much I want to let other people shine and bring their perspectives. And I feel like I learn a lot more when I'm like, how about we try looking at it this way? And then I want to see like the different ways that people come up with solutions, and it would be so different from what I would come up with. And it really takes projects into a really interesting, kind of beautiful place. Yeah.
So we can get into a lot of that stuff, your work particularly now. I kind of have a question where you have to ask people to put their modesty aside a bit, but like, where, all modesty aside, do you feel like your genius is now? Like, amongst the many things that you can do, where do you feel like you're really shining right now?
Um, that's funny. If you asked me like a year ago,
Well,
I
yeah,
would,
sorry, I forgot to ask the second part of that question. And how do you feel that that's changed right back from when you like graduated? Like, what are the things and how has that shifted?
yeah, I think it's shifted a lot. I feel like after I graduated, I was very much Twisha, the designer, who was dabbling in illustration. I think I dabbled really hard and I kind
I
of got,
love that phrase. I dabble hard.
yeah. And I mean, I basically just really started sharing my work, and it's much easier to share a finished piece of artwork rather than a really long kind of design branding project. And so that
Here are
the
all the
nature of
emails
that,
that I sent to like solve this issue with the team.
exactly. And so like I think because I was just really just not thinking too much and just sharing my illustrations out, I started getting a lot of freelance work around just freelance one-off illustrations. And it was really interesting. I didn't know that a company like Spotify could approach Twisha, the individual, and be like, let's work together. Or I didn't know that, you could really kind of even just balance full-time work with freelance work. I kind of figured out a nice way of, full-time work was always 9 to 6 or 9 to 7, and then all my other hours were freelance work or just being a regular person. And so that I think was, and it still is kind of less so maybe, but yeah, freelance illustration was like a huge, huge part of my, I think, identity, and people actually started referring to me as an illustrator. So I had a little bit of like a identity crisis, or
That
like,
was a surprise to you because, like, and for context, I think I know from chatting offline, you're at Apple, right? And you got an iPad and you were playing around in some downtime. And was that a surprise to you? Did you mention Spotify contacting you, and that was like, yeah, was it strange to be suddenly being like earning money off this thing that was just a side project?
yeah, it was strange. It was really exciting. It was definitely like when I would tell my parents, they'd be like, wait, even we didn't know you could do this. And so I think it was really exciting in the sense that I felt very empowered, and I felt like my vision for things, my visuals, my like the work that you do and then the reward that you see in terms of how quickly it goes out into the world, and then the financial reward too, like that in itself was a really fast turnaround time. And it was like a domino effect, even like it would just, one thing would lead to the next one. And I was really enjoying personal projects too. I had a series called Dream Collaborations where I would literally just come up with ideas with some creative restraints. I'd come up with ideas, put out the illustrations, and then because of that work, I would get other work from like a freelance perspective. But even my work at Buck kind of evolved because I think at that point people were. It was kind of it's the quote where it's like, "Do the work that you want to get," or I don't know how that quote goes, but like, put out the work that you want to be
Yeah,
hired
yeah,
for.
yeah, yeah.
Um, so yeah, I think for a while, to answer your question, I think my genius, like not even genius, but like my evolution was almost like image making around a concept and storytelling around an idea. But my tool and my medium was just illustration. I still love storytelling and image making, making it move if it makes sense, putting it in 3D if it makes sense, doing it for like a product if it makes sense. But the storytelling of it all is what still interests me. And so right now I'm kind of reassessing whether I want to be Twisha the illustrator or Twisha the art director or Twisha the designer. I'm not like trying to bucket myself in any way. But yeah, just see where that kind of stuff takes me.
It kind of, yeah, it just reminds me again about the first question I asked about that kind of like fluidity. Maybe saying am I this or that now is kind of old school. Like maybe
Yeah.
that's not the way anymore. Like that's a theme that comes up repeatedly
Yeah.
with people who I chat to here. It's like maybe in the future we're going to be more like curators, because creativity is not just going to be coming from teams, but like tools and AI and things like that. Uh,
Yeah.
so on Actually, two questions. Yeah, the first question is about like play and being a hard dabbler or like hardcore dabbler. How much does that feature? You mentioned you work like long days. You play around on the side as well, like, or you work on the side. Yeah, I guess the question is like, how do you approach play and the development of your craft? Are they the same thing? Are they different? Do you ever create art just for yourself that never sees the light of day?
Yeah. I used to do a lot more of it than I do now. I have way less time now. I've also burnt out a lot from, again, dabbling too hard.
You've burned
And
out from dabbling, you mean? What,
well,
from
I
side
talk
stuff or from just like doing too many things at work?
anything, honestly. It's all happened, I would say. I think, yeah, I had a series called Dream Collaborations where it was completely for myself, and I burned out even just enjoying that. I think I was just doing it like in succession really fast, sleeping really late, things like that. And then it was great because it led to a lot of other freelance projects for myself. And like I said, it like kind of sets the tone for the kind of work you want to be making for the future. But it definitely was one of those like had too much fun for yourself and now you're kind of struggling with the other stuff. Um, and then also I think I would call dabbling and play similar to like experimentation and even just looking at stuff outside of the creative industry. I think that nowadays I'm definitely experimenting more with different tools and different kind of like softwares, or reading more about like stuff outside of the, my direct purview. So looking at like fashion houses, looking at um how like VC players are doing their stuff or things like that. I feel like that really interests me, and I would include that even in just experimentation for myself in terms of changing how you think and look at things. But yeah, I think every now and then I still definitely just pick up my iPad, start drawing. It really depends on the mood and my day and I can never really plan it because I never know what's actually like. If my work at Buck is a little intense during the week, then I'm probably gonna wind down that weekend. If I also have a freelance project going on, then that's probably gonna take up more of my time, and then I have less time to kind of just do stuff for myself. Um, I live in New York, so I have a lot of, social plans just come up. And I think those are also really like inspiring in a way because you can meet people and learn from them. But yeah, it's definitely like a touch and go. Yeah, I never really know how to plan it, but I do love Sundays for like my time to kind of play around and dabble and do stuff for myself. I think Sundays are amazing.
Yeah, absolutely. Um, so yeah, we can come back to that towards the end about like the way that what you're doing is kind of shifting and where you're heading with stuff and the entrepreneurial side of things, or just what you're thinking, loose stuff. But I'm interested, maybe even if it was like a while ago, if you have to answer this about like what you were doing a few years ago, like where do you draw inspiration from? Like, what's your relationship to inspiration? Is it a conscious process, or is it just like, as you said, you do a lot of different things, you make sure that your week and your day is varied, or do you have like specific sources that you kind of go to, or particular areas where you're like really into that actually that feed your work a lot, whether it's music or just visual inspiration?
Um, in terms of inspiration, I think people around me, and then weirdly psychology. I think just the human nature of things is, I find it pretty inspiring because it can help with a lot of problem solving. And then the world around me that's outside of the direct creative world that we're in, I would say those three things are the ones that I find most inspiring. But, in terms of people, I think I've been very lucky to work with a lot of incredible creatives, and my bosses have also all been really amazing. My first boss, her name was Elsa. She really pushed me into figuring out like my own style. Um, Emily Sims, Camille True, Joyce, Ho, Ben Langsfeld, all honestly just people at Buck who are so confident and so smart. And even working just on projects with them, I think I've taken a lot of inspiration, probably subconsciously, but pretty directly too, from just those kinds of people. I also draw, I think, a lot of inspiration from just entrepreneurs and even athletes sometimes. Like I think someone like Virgil Abloh is very interesting because he did a lot of, creative work, but then also started businesses and creative directed for a big fashion house. And I think that kind of life and that kind of journey is really interesting. It's very nonlinear.
There's a very broad definition of what being a creative person is as well, which you're
Exactly.
clearly
Yeah.
going in that direction. Yeah.
I don't know. Yeah. I mean, I would love to. I think that would be amazing. I think that, yeah, just people that have kind of like a non-defined, non-linear approach for like craft and business and mindset. There's a lot of amazing tennis players that have a really good kind of psychological approach to like routine and losses and things like that. I think, yeah, I draw inspiration from a lot of things.
Yeah, great. It's great that you're so conscious about it as well. Can we just dive back a little bit to mentors then? You mentioned a bunch of people. If you had to maybe choose two, like without like downplaying any of the other mentors, maybe just choosing them for the sake of this conversation, not in terms of like priority order. Um, are there any that really stand out? You mentioned one of them particularly, I think.
Hmm.
And again, also with mentors, like sometimes people think like a mentor is like an official thing. I just mean people who for you have like really
Yeah.
impacted you.
Yeah.
that you've worked with?
I think, I mean, I've been at Buck for about 4 years now, and there's been a lot of people. I don't even know how to pick two. I would say one of them is Camille Chu. She's amazing in like branding. She's also um just like such a unicorn at Buck, and kind of took me under her wing a long time ago, and just would talk about the randomest stuff. We don't even talk about work all the time. We talk about like jewelry and all of these other things. So she probably has no idea how much she actually like influences and like gives me joy and inspires me and stuff. But yeah, just the way she thinks and works and leads teams, I think she's an amazing mentor and inspiration. But um I would say even Emily Sims, she's amazing. She's not at Buck anymore. She's in Barcelona being amazing. She really helped me a lot. And then Ben Langsfeld, who's now he's the chief design officer at Buck, but even with that role, he's like such a, you know, team forward person, and really like takes people under his wing. And I'm sure he has a busy calendar, but he still manages it. Um, but yeah, in terms of what I've learned from them, I think it's tough to pinpoint. It's a lot of stuff around um, just being a really like empathetic person on a team, whether that's a designer or a director. And then, yeah, really having a lot of confidence to voice your ideas, voice your vision, make it happen, bring the right people on the team. Um, yeah, I think.
This might be a good point to ask you about your journey there from, I guess, designer to art director, right? That's your official role now, art director. Um, what, yeah, what was it like? What was the kind of work that you were doing when you first arrived, and how has that kind of journey, that kind of work changed? What's that journey been like?
Yeah, so when I first started at Buck, that was in 2021. I actually started as a freelancer specifically like to illustrate for a Shopify project. And then I made the pivot to becoming full time. And I would say the first kind of 2 years, I was a designer for I was a designer for 1 year. No, I was a designer for 2 years and a senior designer for 1 year. And I would say a chunk of that time was basically only illustration projects and a variety of styles. I had my own style as like my freelance solo Twisha style. And then at Buck, I was a little bit more of like a broad, um, what's the word? Like I would kind of tap into different styles depending on what the project required. And then after some time, I kind of, every time I would be on an illustration project, I would really miss doing graphic design. And then when I was on a graphic design project, I would really miss doing illustration. And so somehow Buck was really nice about that and would kind of let me jump back and forth. So I was really 50-50. And it was great. It was a lot of like branding projects, and then an illustration project, and then a design system for like a tech company, and then back to another like very conceptual storytelling, like animation or something. Um, and then over time, I think I started noticing that I had a lot of ideas for everything basically. And I was like, I want to kind of, I think, broaden my horizons a bit. I was on a Microsoft project they had their new Surface Pro lineup coming out that incorporated Copilot. And somehow I ended up kind of falling into the seat of art directing like a bunch of 3D designers. And it really worked well with my skill set because of my illustration stuff. I had a lot of strength in understanding materiality and lighting and composition, and I could kind of naturally not really know the 3D pipeline too well, but still direct for it. And we were building assets for their website launch, and I had my graphic design and type skills for the website stuff. And so it all kind of like came together in a really organic way. And I really enjoyed art directing for 3D. And so that's kind of how I started making my transition into art direction. And I think it was also just reposition or almost rebranding myself internally at Buck as someone that can do a lot more than just illustration or just graphic design. Not that anything's wrong with that. I think a lot of people at Buck niche down as well and in life, but yeah, I was just kind of like, I could tell that I wanted my pace to go like in and out, up and down through a lot of different things. And so, um, yeah. And then once I became art director, I was doing, um, my first project was a brand, a campaign system for a it was a genetics company. And then the one after that was like motion for an animation. Um and then after that it was a UX, like a illustration system for a UX platform. And now I'm full circle. Now I'm back on like an illustration system for for
Yeah,
a tech company. Yeah.
that's so interesting. So I have a bunch of questions that come up in my head there. First one, I guess, is about like style as an illustrator. Like when you came in with Twisha Patni style, and then like you were asked to like find other styles or emulate other styles. How does that work? Like, and both in terms of like how it's asked of you, like is it just like here are some references, or like here's some work that we've been working on, um particularly for illustration. I can imagine it for UI, I can imagine it for graphic design in general, but I've not got much experience in illustration. um Firstly, how does that work, and then also, is it ever really hard? Like, it seems to me that like illustrators have more of a style generally, and it's harder to sort of like move across. Or have you ever struggled with that?
No, for me, I think it was actually the other way around, where I started off really wanting to not have a style and really wanting to kind of flex across like being able to do visuals that are in vector and have an outline versus really textured and painterly versus I think what I ended up getting kind of like uh niched into, which was more surreal, airbrushy, dimensional, realistic visuals. I kind of started off wanting to do a little bit of all of it. And then I think slowly, as I was getting more projects, people would be like, we want you to do that style. And so it just kind of started repeating itself. And then at Buck, I think there was like a combination of people knowing that I can kind of do a broad scope and then be specific with that one style as well, because I was just repeating. It was the like 10,000 hour rule. I literally was just repeating that style so much that I was like, I you want me to do it, I'll do it, but if you want me to do something else too, I can like make that happen as well. But yeah, did that answer your question?
Yeah, kind of. I guess the one of the questions inside it was, have you ever struggled with like emulating a style in illustration? Or does it, and I think you've answered that as no, because you've always tried to be able to cover anything. Are there any particular illustrators that you admire a lot, where you're just like, wow, that's next level? Um,
Yeah. Weirdly, the illustrators that I admire are I probably also 3D artists. One illustrator that I love, she's 2D. Her name is G.A. Lee. I might have butchered her name, but her work is amazing. Um, so I honestly love a lot of my friends' work. Haruko Hayakawa, she's a 3D artist. She's absolutely incredible. Um, Joanna Croft, also 3D, absolutely incredible. I honestly get a lot of inspiration from 3D artists because I think my style has to kind of it looks at realism and lighting and texture so closely. Um, so yeah.
yeah, we spoke about that offline, and it's a kind of thread I really wanted to ask about. Like, obviously, you've been in doing like, that's a key thread in your style, 2.5D like illustration and like motion and things like that. But then you mentioned, am I right that the first project that you did as an art director was the Copilot one? Was that right?
Uh,
Or where you were
yeah.
working with 3D, where you were working with like true 3D workflows? Um, yeah. So do I have a question here? Yeah, maybe you could dig in a little bit more about like what that was like, what for the first time working with like seasoned 3D pros. And was it Wes Cox by any chance? Like, because he's also been on the podcast, and I know he's done a lot of Surface Copilot
No.
renders.
Yeah, no, he
Was it?
wasn't on that
No, it
one.
wasn't him. Okay.
No. But I would love to work with him. He's incredible. But it was very interesting. I definitely felt a little out of my depth, and thankfully, I had another 3D lead who was helping with the more technical parts of the, um, tasking and figuring out production and things like that. But when it came to working directly with 3D artists and looking for like a specific outcome, what I was able to kind of do was kind of provide very clear kind of references for the outcome that we were looking for, making sure that everything was very rooted in concept and logic, and not just having a light show up from one place for no rhyme or reason, but having it kind of move with intention and convey the like checklist of things that we really wanted to convey to highlight a product, um, only using specific kind of techniques to add meaning and add value and not just make it decorative. And so I think it kind of went hand in hand with a lot of my own thinking, in the sense that I really obviously love concept and love a good visual. I think we all do. But yeah, making sure that everything is really rooted in logic and story and um, a really solid metaphor, things like that. So really like creating feeling and adding a story, but then supplementing it with, form and
So maybe you could dive in a little bit from what you remember. I know it was a while ago on this project, and like you alluded to like solid concept underneath design with a big project like this. And I've definitely worked on projects where like we haven't had the time or the resources to actually like get that working, and you kind of feel it, like it works, the video runs, like it's great, it could look really shiny and amazing, but there's something kind of lacking underneath. I guess you could call this creative direction or concepting or whatever. Maybe you could speak to that a little bit for people who haven't kind of worked on big projects like this.
yeah. So for this project, it was well, Microsoft was our client, and then the project itself was purely about highlighting the new features, Copilot integration, showing like beautiful new colors for, their Surface lineup. And so we kind of spent like a good amount of time. Um, I think a good amount of time is usually about a week to maybe even more, maybe 2 weeks of just strategy and creative visioning around what the strategy is. So in terms of creative strategy, it's usually just kind of the why behind any idea, and then the art direction, the concepting is how it comes to life visually. And I really like working in, the space where they kind of overlap really nicely, and that really helps to uplift the story, the message, the design principles, the ways that you can kind of tie those all in to make a concept really strong. And it can be really simple. It can even just be like Microsoft wants this to feel really human and warm and, easy to understand. And so the design principles that we might kind of land on after all of the strategy exploration would be making sure that everything is always rooted in warm light. Maybe not overly warm light, but like just the perfect kind of warmth that feels really rooted in reality, really warm and inviting, and really authentic to like letting people understand that this is very much in the real world. And then in terms of the motion of it, for example, we never showed any product flying or floating. Like that feels a bit too magical. And so you would always be able to see a surface in a composition, or you would be able to see that the product is kind like sitting on something. If you can't see the surface, it's resting on something. So it's really kind of behavioral, like something creating a feeling rather than a specific kind of literal idea. Um, so yeah, it was stuff like that that was like, I think strategy and like visioning before you get into the execution. I think that really helps kind of make sure that everyone is kind of, there's a playground, but everyone's kind of playing within the right playground, you know?
Right. It reminds me of just like the classic thing of restriction in creativity, like setting rules before you actually like get to work, and versus like the blank canvas of let's make a great project. And those principles sound really cool. And yeah, that's inspiring. Um, so it reminds me of the last interview that I've done that should be coming out soon with Tom Parks, who's actually at Glide, and he said this thing just about like how valuable the recent brand strategy work has been for his work. And it was just making me thinking. Obviously, Buck is like an agency, a huge agency, like, and Microsoft will have its own like brand strategy internally. How does it work when like they come to you for a project? Like, surely they have like huge resources internally. I guess the first very quick question would be like, why do they come to Buck versus doing it internally? And then like, do they come with a whole like, do you have a contact there who's like already established brand strategy, and like, how do they pitch it with their brand strategy? How does that work? Like, what context are you getting at the beginning there?
I wish I had someone from Buck with me here right now. His name is Thomas. He handles a lot of the Microsoft work, and he would speak to this way better than I'm going to, but I'll speak to like a little bit of what I know. In terms of Microsoft specifically, and I'm sure this is the case with a lot of other clients too. Um, One great thing about Buck is it's been around for a long time, so there's a lot of kind of history and like all of the relationships that it has. And I think the way that something that I really love is Buck has a lot of people. It has like I'm I hope I don't get this wrong, but it has like 700 or 8, maybe more people. But I think what I've always understood that clients really like is that every project feels really intimate regardless. Like the team will always be probably the same team that you've worked on another Microsoft project. The next time it's probably a similar team, and the size is the right size, and there aren't too many cooks in the kitchen. And so I think everything always feels really kind of like intimate and thoughtful, and everyone's really kind. And so, um, yeah, any project is usually just like a good experience. It's a good collaboration. But yeah, to answer your question, I think whenever any kind of client approaches Buck, what my understanding is that they usually obviously come with a brief. It's not just let's, it's not loose. So they come with a brief, and then we kind of work around that and like question and maybe reframe the brief to get to the real problem. Because sometimes, it's not just we want to create an illustration system for XYZ product. It's usually we're trying to make sure that our old system works with the new system, and we have hints and pieces of the old and the new, and it feels warm and human. And there's all these other things that you kind of discover in that phase. And then from there, it's pretty collaborative. There's a lot of, strategic framing, but then concept exploration, but then look dev and like figuring out the visual language and then executing across really clear deliverables. And so, yeah, it's a lot of constant kind of conversation between teams and making sure that one thing that I think really love is that everyone at Buck, in terms of like the creative directors and then resourcing and like everyone kind of involved, they usually have a really good hand on what the like what artists and people want to be doing and want to be working on. And so they're amazing with just resourcing the right people onto a project, and they play that little game of Tetris really well in my opinion, where people get to
That's
work
a
on the
great way of
things
putting it.
that yeah, they get to work on the stuff that they're like excited for. And yeah, it usually works out really well. And it can be like designers, motion, 3D, creative tech, and so everything is really kind of dynamic and integrated. um so yeah, it's an interesting like ship that keeps going. And yeah, the Tetris of it all is really, really, well done.
Just it's really interesting, like like a personal reflection. Like, I work in a fairly small company, especially compared to Buck and certainly Microsoft. And so like my experience is like very different. Not that it's bad, but it's like under resourced, like in a normal way, like you'd expect for a startup. And like many of the guests that I speak to, like I'm really looking forward to a point, either whether I'm somewhere else or whether Glide grows to a certain point where you get that stage. Because when we have that kind of space and time for for like the tier one launches, I just love it so much, but we don't get to do it so much. There's there's a lot of deliverables and like sort of shipping stuff. Like, okay, this is a really important thing we need in like 2 weeks, and like let's just quickly write a script, get buy-in on that. Have you ever worked like that, or is it ever? Have you usually been at large companies where it's like well resourced?
Um, yeah, I mean, honestly, the timelines, I feel like in the last maybe just even like 2 years, timelines have gotten like
Right.
halved. And then
That's a
how
different
do
topic
you
of
find the
conversation. Yeah.
best possible resources in the time that you have?
Yeah.
So yeah, I definitely relate to that. I think I've I was very specific about the size of the company I wanted to work at. Um, Maybe less so now, but I think everything is good and bad. Like, I think big companies come with a lot of structure and scale, and so you can learn process really well and kind of like learn from a lot of different types of people, maybe really quickly. I think smaller studios are amazing because they offer a lot of speed and ownership, and you can be really scrappy but like resourceful, and a lot of beauty comes from that. Um, and I personally, I honestly, I've in terms of interning and freelancing and working full time, I've worked at the range of it all, I think. Um,
Maybe you could just give like a couple, just for people who don't know about your career, like some of the main internships and the main places that you remember.
yeah, that I remember. Yeah.
And
Um,
like again, modesty aside, you might just have to do some bullet points here because it'd be really interesting to then just ask you a couple of questions about the places and what you've learned from that.
yeah. Okay. So freshman year of college, after freshman year of college, I interned at Atlantic Records and then also at a smaller, it was like a book marketing company. Sophomore year, I interned at a fashion brand called Millie, and I that's when I started doing freelance work, but only in like graphic design branding space. And then my third year of college, that summer, I interned at Apple, but on their like on their social media team. So I was a designer mostly on that team. And then I also, while I was there, started dabbling in their Marcom team. And then my senior year, and then after that summer, I was interning at a design studio, which at the time was called Partners in Spade. Now it's called Mythology. And then my last summer of college, I went back to Apple and I interned there, but this time I was on the Marcom team. Um,
Did you do you did the WWDC poster, right? Was that when you were with Apple or
yes.
okay, cool, nice.
Yeah,
What was
that's
that
when I
like?
was at Apple.
Was
Yeah.
that like a big project? Yeah, for you?
No, that was actually
No.
the WWDC poster was actually for like internal. It was like an internal company event. Yeah.
Oh, okay. I got that
Yeah.
wrong. Sorry. Okay, fine.
No,
I
no,
thought
no, all
like
good. It
the
was
main branding for it. I kind of read it somewhere.
I don't know.
Yeah.
I wish I could help with the main branding. I wasn't cool enough. I was just an intern helping with like company things.
Okay. Okay. Cool. See, research failure there for the listeners.
No, that's
Oh,
totally fine. I was helping when I was at Apple, I was helping more with like you kind of start right when WWDC is about to happen, so you don't really get to see like the work that goes behind that, but then you help with the September launch, which
okay.
is really interesting and fun. And depending on the team that you're on, it could be like for the watch, it could be for the phone, for the Mac, whatever. I was helping more so with their retail, like the retail storytelling of it all. So working with all of the different product teams, and then really like sourcing in the right kind of art direction and creatives and things like that, mainly for their retail spaces.
Out of
Uh,
the big tech companies, who do you feel like is kind of executing really well in terms of like their brand and their design? And like, who are some of your favorites? Or maybe it's not just a company, but like particular things that you've seen coming out because
I
they vary a lot.
They vary a lot. I've really been enjoying out of the tech companies. Tech is so broad these days. I've really been enjoying like, does Cash App count? I love Cash App's visual system. I also love like Duolingo. I think Duolingo is really quirky and fun, and their product is amazing. And then yeah, I think in terms of like the bigger companies, I think I think Google has, they have a lot going on, but they're getting a bit more like focused and niche and still really playing on like a really wide visual system. So I think that's really nice and they do that really well. Um, yeah.
So just going back to what we were talking about earlier, like do you do you ever do like creative strategy officially at Buck, or is it always art direction? And obviously there's like a lot of crossover there. Maybe you could speak to that for people who don't necessarily know about those two roles. Um,
Yeah.
is there
Um,
always a creative strategist on a project? Like, do you sometimes fill in that role? Like, yeah, maybe you could define it a little bit for us.
Yeah, I personally just really am interested in creative strategy, but there are people at Buck who are quite literally creative strategists, and that is their role. So by no means am I trying to take their lives over at
Can
all.
you
They're
be an
amazing.
art director without having a little bit of creative strategy in your head?
I think you can. I think it really depends. Like, I feel like there's so many different types of art directors, and some really want to even like execute and be on the box. I'm split when it comes to that too. I enjoy the visioning. I also enjoy the execution. So I'll jump in and like get, on the box like I said, but yeah, I think if it's usually what the budget allows for. If we have a creative strategist on the project, then that's like a really nice bonus, and I think those projects always move really well and have a lot of grounding and logic. Um, yeah, if we don't, I think there's naturally, I don't think that it's the most effective way to just jump right into execution because you end up flailing sometimes. I think, yeah, always having like thinking behind it and logic behind it. It's like you can't get ready in the morning if you don't have a plan for like what the weather is outside. So I feel like it's just yeah, in my head it's pretty natural to just have like a plan at the bare
Yeah.
minimum.
And for people who don't do this kind of work and don't get into it, like offline we spoke about, you mentioned what was it? Surprise and delight as kind of these words in the way that you want to like the sort of the vision or the like the what you're pushing for in your work. And like maybe you could talk to a little bit about like what that is and what it takes sometimes to like create a concept that is actually striking rather than just vanilla.
Yeah. Yeah. I think surprise and delight, it all kind of gets wrapped into like interesting storytelling. And I think interesting is also very subjective. Um, different people with different perspectives would find different things interesting. I think for me, I moved around a lot as a kid and I was in a lot of different schools and I'm always kind of like I was exposed to a lot of different types of people really early on, which I'm obviously really, grateful for and happy about. But I feel like because of that, I was always intrigued by like just human psychology and the way that people like everyone thinks so differently and views the world so differently. And I think finding the like creativity in that and like visualizing like the like playing on people's perception of things I think is kind of fun. And it's just like it's irony at the end of the day. I think it's fun to not take yourself too seriously and also play on how serious everyone is. I don't really know if I'm answering your question, but yeah, I think
No, no,
surprise and delight with like exploration, ideation, experimenting, and like having different ways of problem solving.
if you were teaching like a beginner's class to people who'd never kind of thought in this way and weren't naturally inclined to do so, what might be some of the things you would get them to do or you might say to them?
I would say a couple of different things, but if we're making it a process, like if this is a semester and I'm going to break it up into like three different phases, I feel like the first phase would be don't look at anything that's going on in the world and don't take inspiration from like other creatives at all, just so that you kind of develop your POV on like regular life things that aren't kind of like somebody else's project or someone else's like vision for something. And that can really come from like just, catching up on the news, reading like looking at people's houses and like architectural digest. I don't know. It can come from a lot of different places. I really enjoy like fashion and things like that. But yeah, I think that would be phase one. Um, phase two, I think there was, and I referenced Virgil Abloh like a while ago in this conversation, but he had this interesting kind of like he had like a set like a manifesto for himself, which was like design principles. And one of those principles was that he would change something that already exists by 3%. And so that can literally, and you can kind of see that reflect in his work too, where he would just take a rug and like put text on it and it like changes the whole meaning of the rug. And so that's like a 3% change in something. And so I would almost kind of just try to look at simple things in that way. And then probably phase three would be like the execution of it. And so I think, yeah, in my illustration work, I really enjoy like dabbling in this kind of world where things are immediately kind of recognizable and understandable. But like if you look closer, then maybe a small part of it has been altered or tweaked so that it creates a new meaning for itself. So yeah, kind of like taking a metaphor and then like flipping it on its head or adding something to it. So one of the projects that I did for The Economist was something like this, where it was about like how there's I'm gonna butcher this, but it was about like how TV and film have like short form content coming out. And so I was just thinking of like short form content, bite-sized content, the cup noodles, like you can literally make them in like a minute or 2 minutes, and that's how long the content is. And so I was kind of trying to play on that and then have like a little film board coming out of the cup of noodles. Um, Now that I'm saying it, it sounds really funny, but
No,
uh
no, it makes total sense. Yeah.
yeah, kind of just like yeah, playing with ideas in interesting ways and like flipping them on their head.
Obviously, it's not something that you can sum up and teach in a podcast question, but you did an amazing job. Thanks. Um, I want to just ask again about like you mentioned about execution and now you're in this role of art director. Like, but you do dive into execution. You like executing. Like, what's the balance on a project now? Like, are you leading a team of people? Like, and how do you how do you lead? Like, I was listening to a podcast this morning from with a developer, and they were talking about sometimes someone was saying about like is language the future of programming, and they were like, no, it's absolutely not, because sometimes it's much quicker if I just like grab the keyboard, write an example, and then the other developer will be like, oh, I get you, and like so sometimes you will. So I guess do you sort of flit in your leadership between like giving examples and then getting your team to run with it, and or do you find yourself talking a lot? Like, is that more the realm that you're working in now as an art director?
Yeah, that's all of this is something I'm still definitely figuring out. I think when it comes to being on a team, in the art director role, I think I love working in ways that everyone kind of brings something different to the table, but also feels very kind of safe to share their ideas. And so especially for like younger designers, I think like even up to like 2 years ago, I personally felt pretty like shy or embarrassed sometimes to like share an idea during a meeting and like be put on the spot. And so I kind of try to make like a comfortable atmosphere for that without leaning too hard into it. But yeah, I think like being someone who can make everyone kind of feel safe and comfortable and kind of like leading sounds really intense, but kind of like operating in a way that feels empathetic and humble and like letting people kind of have that balance of like humility, but also conviction and making sure that everyone's ideas are kind of heard. I think initially when I first started, I thought that people like wanted the solution and just wanted to execute, but I don't think that that's the most productive way of going about it. I feel like people kind of naturally have their own, you know, skill sets and ideas that they should bring to the table. Um, and then, yeah, when it comes to like me jumping into execution, I think that's usually when I'm just kind of excited by something and want to try it out. And if there's time for it, obviously. But yeah, I'm learning to kind of trust my intuition a bit more when it comes to that. And then also not talk too much. I started reading this book called Smart Brevity. I don't know if this podcast did any of that because I feel like I've talked a lot, but
That's
it's
the goal.
yeah, it's basically learning about like conveying your vision and idea in the most simple way and letting people kind of run with it and come up with their own.
So I know you recently worked on a big project with Google for like Gemini, like visual systems. I'd love to know a little bit about that and like what that entailed. Um, and also like presumably that went into the realms of like UI design as well, which clearly you've worked in a bit. So yeah, I'd love to hear about that because it sounds like that's a good project to give a sense of like not just an interesting project, but the way that that would work, the way that you work with a team.
Yeah. So yeah, for context, we basically were working on the way that UI kind of shows up on Gemini. So Gemini the platform, and then whenever Gemini is kind of marketed in the world. And that we called it the illustration system. But in my opinion, it was very like it was the visuals that you see that kind of in make people understand behaviors and like interaction within product. So not just the like user experience, but also like explanations for it and educational moments for it, and then even like addressing features around it. And so we basically were kind of designing for motion and designing for product, but then incorporating like little mini stories and also incorporating like human behavior in a way that doesn't necessarily always have to show hands or faces and things like that. And so the first part of what we worked on was kind of the onboarding experience for like when you're like literally setting up a pixel and you need like a user needs to get educated on onboarding themselves into Gemini. So what we kind of tried to figure out with a lot of, creative strategy in the beginning and then like in the concepting and then execution phases, we essentially tried to build a world that could live across a lot of different formats, work light and dark mode, and then be really scalable and um obviously like uh Gemini forward, scalability forward, but also making sure that it felt really kind of human and not scary and not robotic and really approachable and really meaningful. And so, yeah, it was a lot of kind of conceptual design and like taking abstract ideas and behavioral movements and making them feel kind of like easily digestible and delightful and things like that. And I think that in terms of, illustration systems like that, it's always kind of making sure that everything feels really kind of modular and scalable, but really just kind of rooted in, strong logic and like human behavior. Um, and so yeah, it's essentially like I would say it's not just one-off kind of visuals. It's more just like a system of assets and motifs and colors and layouts that can be effectively kind of reused and remixed and even like built on by other teams in case that our team isn't around after a point. Obviously the project will end, but like it can keep kind of living on its own and have that kind of ownability. So it's really kind of like illustration meeting brand thinking, and having consistency and
In terms
adaptability.
of the motion side of stuff, obviously, like what are the assets or the deliverables that you're handing off? Are they like actual UI that you can use, or is it all just like rendered motion that then needs to be interpreted by developers?
Um, we actually were not on the like the developing like the UI literally. We were kind of providing the visuals that would support it and even just like guidance around how some of the UI could maybe evolve or like tweak itself. But in terms of what we were handing off, we were just handing off kind of um like Figma files, motion toolkits.
And what was the motion toolkit? I guess I'm interested, like what that was.
It was for us, it was a series of like really specific deliverables, but then also the working files for those deliverables, and then also like imagine a brand guidelines, but only around motion. And so this is the way that the spark should always move. This is what it shouldn't do. This is how fast it should move. It should never bounce. Like really, really specific kind of like logic and thinking and examples around that. Yeah, it's like
A bit
we
in the same way
dissected
that
it
you spoke
down to
about
the
the Copilot stuff, like it should always be grounded. It shouldn't be
right.
floating, sort of that sort of thing. Okay, interesting.
Yeah. But like getting really, really, really specific about it.
I bet, yeah, yeah. Especially with like small things, like with a video that's about marketing, fine, but like it's like, a small little element has so much to play. The smaller it is, what I mean, the more it communicates. I think about that with Glide's loading spinner. Like every time you open up Glide, it's the same loading spinner we've had for like however long, and we keep on wanting to change it, but it keeps being deprioritized.
That
But
was one
yeah,
of the things that was like, it should never rotate more than once. If it goes too much, then it looks too playful. And so, like, that's not okay. Yeah.
yeah. Tusha, I have so many more questions. Like, I'm gonna have to get you back at some point. I guess the last one is to really just ask about like what's next and what are you looking forward to? Like, you, presumably you're not leaving Buck anytime soon. It feels like it's a really fulfilling thing, but I know you're interested in stuff on the side. Maybe you could even answer where you see yourself in like, or what you see yourself doing in 5 or 10 years.
Yeah. I'm in that phase right now where I don't really, you could call it a really positive, fun existential crisis. I think I'm enjoying what I'm doing right now. I love being a Buck. I'm loving, a new phase of like, art director stuff. I think in like the distant future or maybe immediate, I don't know, it really depends on time. I would love to kind of build more things and like experiment with more things. And I don't know what that really looks like yet. I don't know if that's like a studio or a brand or a platform. I feel like I have a lot of um ideas constantly and I kind of want to like again like make a little playground for myself. Um but yeah, I do really want to be thoughtful about it. And I'm not sure if that's just illustration or more beyond illustration. But yeah, something that feels a little bit more kind of like entrepreneurial, um, and like broad enough, not too specific, but also not all over the place. And so I do want to be thoughtful about it. I definitely don't want to burn out over it. And so I want it to be passion and not pressure. Um,
Hardcore dabbling.
Hardcore dabbling, but like mid-core dabbling.
Hardcore dabbling.
Sustainable dabbling. Um, so yeah, and I think I'm surrounded by a lot of like people in a lot of different types of industries like finance and tech and entrepreneurship and stuff like that, and obviously the creative world. And so I feel like, I there's a lot to think about. I'm gonna leave it at that. I'm not fully sure yet, but we'll figure it out.
Trisha, thanks so much for your time. Really appreciate it.
Thank you. This was so much fun talking to you. You have the most amazing questions, and they were all so thoughtful. So, yeah, it was great.